since you've raised Taiwan, let me ask the question. Taiwan has now completed the first stage of its economic cooperation framework agreement with the mainland. Taiwan, as an economy, is an interesting economy, quite significant trading partner with the United States. To what extent is Taiwan fair game with any of these trade agreements, or does Beijing have an essential veto on its participation?
Well, I'd like to face this question squarely in the face and say I'd like to hear the others' views.
We have Taiwan is a very important trading partner of the United States. As many of you know, we've had some significant problems on the agricultural trade front in recent years, particularly as it relates to beef and a few other issues. But we have robust trade with Taiwan in so many different areas. And the primary vehicle for U.S.-Taiwan trade interaction has been through our TIFA, the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement. TIFA hasn't met for a couple of years, but we are working with our counterparts in Taiwan to hopefully reconvene a robust TIFA that will be able to cover the variety of trade issues and commonalities and concerns that we face with Taiwan.
Squarely in the face in both cases.
There's an old political joke here.
No, absolutely. Just in the back there.
Thank you. Jim Berger from Washington Trade Daily. Getting back to the TPP, as I understand it, the idea of TPP will go way beyond tariff reduction, non-tariffs, even services trade, to include something like environment, trade facilitation, access for small and medium businesses, regulatory, I don't want to say convergence, but regulations. How will negotiators know whether this agreement will be knit so tightly it won't fit, or so loose it has no effect?
I mean, I think as Tim had mentioned in his earlier comments, one of the points of the Trans-Pacific Partnership is to create a 21st century agreement that tackles issues that haven't been covered before in past trade agreements. The intent is that it will cover the sort of the traditional areas of trade, but there's a lot of things that we can do as a region that haven't been done before in trade agreements. For instance, how do you further buttress and solidify regional supply chains to create some sort of rationality in the region through supply chains? You mentioned regulations. How do you achieve more regulatory coherence on key issues that would help promote and accelerate trade amongst the TPP partners? What are things we can do together that can help better integrate small and medium-sized enterprises into the growing regional trade flows? How do we use TPP to help further development in the lesser developed TPP negotiating partners? So there are a lot of topics that we haven't covered before in the trade agreement, and what's been very interesting, for me, for sort of watching this a little bit a step removed from the sort of the day-to-day negotiations, is how much creativity is being put into solving or addressing these issues by all of the TPP partners. I think it's hard to predict what the agreement's going to look like at the end of the day, but I do think there are going to be areas in there that are going to be new and trailblazing and reflect the realities and the differences of the Asia-Pacific trade relationship today than existed 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The other innovation that I want to point out is, I think the goal that all of us share is to ensure that the TPP isn't a static agreement and is out of date the minute it's concluded. And there's the hope that it can be a living agreement so that it is able to continue to address shifts in global trade patterns or developments in areas like cloud computing, or things that we didn't think about last year, let alone 5 years ago.
Can I just put some icing on one of the slices of the cake? Demetrios has been talking about, and that's his point about a living entity. And I think it's quite a subtle point that Demetrios is making, so I'll just like to develop it. I'm a huge fan of the concept of mutual recognition. And, you know, harmonization doesn't work in trade policy. If you take Australia and New Zealand, so what we're trying to do between these two countries, which could have been, but for history, one country, but didn't turn out that way, is we're trying to become two countries, one system. It's sort of like the opposite of the Chinese vision for cross-strait relations, one country, two systems. We're two countries, one system is the goal. And mutual recognition is such a powerful and positive instrument for that. Australians introduced us to it in, I think, I forget the year, but the 90s. And it reflected their own experience amongst the states, establishing finally full mutual recognition agreement amongst the Australian states quite recently. We then exported the concept of trade policy to Singapore in an FTA that I led in the 90s. And I think that's where we want to go. So if you get a country, the premier economy in the world, the United States and New Zealand, they're not going to change their system to us. But it's not unreasonable to ask the United States to take a generous look at the way we regulate and say, you know, do you US negotiators, you regulators, have sufficient confidence in us, in our systems, to recognize that as having equivalent effect? And I think that's an answer which can emerge only over a period of time. So we're not going to do everything in this negotiation at the date of ratification. We'll do as much as we can there, but as Demetrios says, you establish something that's a living process, and you can take this into areas. I mean, who amongst us have heard of cloud computing 5 years ago? I doubt anyone. Perhaps one or two experts from IBM over here, but none of the rest of us. So that's one of the visions that we have for this agreement.
As a developing country, one of the very few developing countries among the APP who's expressed interest, I think we are very conscious of the fact when we came on board that this is very ambitious, this is high quality, and it's got to be plus plus. It's got to go beyond whatever we've done within ASEAN and other regional arrangements. We're looking at this from point of view of benchmarking ourselves, enhancing productivity, of course, making our economies more competitive. As you know, I mean, there's a big gap between many of these participants, and we're conscious of that fact. And so it's going to be very, for a developing country, it's going to be very challenging to be part of this process. And we see a lot of value in this. It's going to make us work harder, make us more competitive. It's going to be a plus plus, including MRAs and all this. Thank you.
Make that the last word. Let me ask each of you to join me in thanking Minister Tim Groser of New Zealand, Mr. Mustapa Mohamed from Malaysia, and Ambassador Demetrios Marantis. Thank you.